What's going on, all you beautiful role-playing game fans out there? David here, and you guys read the title correctly. That's right. This is my all-time top 5 role-playing games that I love. Now, I can't tell you guys how many times over the past almost 6 years of me doing my YouTube channel and Twitch channel of, hey Dave, what is your favorite role-playing game? Well, I'm going to tell you in this video. And just because it's my opinion, take it with a grain of salt. Because what my favorite 5 is probably not what your favorite 5 is going to be. So now that we've got all of that out of the way, here's a couple honorable mentions that did not make my top 5. So the first game that didn't make my top 5 was Star Frontiers. And we didn't play Star Frontiers that long. And it was a science fiction game that basically emulated Star Wars, because this game came out, you know, as Star Wars was coming out, The Empire Strikes Back, and we wanted to try it to see if it would give us that Star Wars satisfaction. And it actually did that. You know, not only did it have the D100 percentile mechanic, which we weren't used to because D&D had all the other dice, but it was your typical role-playing game with your characters and your character sheets running around on planets doing stuff. Then there was vehicular, like chases and combat on vehicles, which was actually pretty cool and not in D&D. And then there was like big mass ship battles. That was really fun too, with big, you know, maps of like the galaxy with planets on it. And that was actually really fun. We didn't play it a whole lot, but it was still fun. And it gave us that satisfaction of like Star Wars and Star Trek and stuff like that. So Star Frontiers, definitely an honorable mention. The next was called Tallis Lanta. And we were playing this probably in the middle to late 80s. And this is a fantasy game, just like Dungeons and Dragons, but with one difference. There was no dwarves, there were no elves, and in fact, I think they even mentioned that they hated elves in the book. And then from what I remember, there were no humans. But there was a huge amount of races in this game, and a huge amount of classes, which in Tallis Lanta, from what I remember, the classes and the races were kind of mixed together. And then you could choose all kinds of different variants, which there were probably, I would say, close to probably 100 in the core rulebook. I mean, it was crazy the amount of depth that these characters were going into, especially when role-playing games were actually fairly new still in the middle 80s. It was actually really nice. And I do like the dice system, and I remember this quite distinctively, because it was still a D20 like Dungeons and Dragons, but it worked off of like 5 tiers of success. So if you rolled from like a 1 to 4, it was like a critical fumble, and then something would really bad happen. And if it was like a 5 to like a 9, then it was just a flat out miss. And like a 10 to a 14 was like a glancing blow, and you only did like half damage. But anything like 15 to 19, that was a pure hit. And then anything 20 and up, that was a huge critical success, and then you'd get to do something special too. So it was actually a really cool system, and it was definitely a lot different than D&D, because it was much more in depth with more races and classes, and then I would say in some aspect it was actually superior to D&D. And there was quite a few sources out at the time, but they were super expensive, and we were still into the whole D&D thing. But I really could see Tallis Lanta, if we would have stuck with it, I could probably imagine that this game would probably be in my top 5. And I'd probably even still be playing it today. So coming in at number 5 is Shadow the Demon Lord by Schwab Entertainment. Now this game is a very dark and gritty D20 game. And I like the setting. I like how it's fully supported, and I love the tremendous amount of PDFs that it has out there that you can enhance your game. I like how the core rulebook has everything that you need to play. It has everything for players, it has everything for dungeon masters, and it has a very robust bestiary. I really like the class structure. I like how there are core classes, as in like your mage, your fighter, your priest, and your rogue or thief types. I like how as you level up, you get to either advance within those 4 core basic classes, or you can sort of multi-class out with all of the other multi-class mumbo jumbo that you got to deal with other games. So if you want to start with a mage, and then at the next tier, which I think is level 3, then you can jump on the fighter or rogue. And then when you hit the next tier after that, you can dabble into something else, which you can really customize your character and have a lot of choices in this game. And for me, liking a game, you have to have a lot of choices for the classes, because if it doesn't have a lot of variety, you lose me right there. And this game does not lose me at all. I also like the main mechanic or the main gimmick of the game, which is boons and banes. And this basically works the same way as advantage and disadvantage in 5e, but with a single modifier number instead of a full die. So I do like the boons and banes. And lastly, I like how everything is set up for a game master. You know, if you're old school like me and you like charts, you're going to like Shadow of the Demon Lords, because there are tons and tons of charts. Everything for, you know, choosing your background for your race, to quirks of a magic item, you know, and encounter rolls, everything. So for a DM, it's set up really nicely. And even the monster stat blocks are set up beautifully, to where you don't even have to go to other parts of the book and look up poisons. You don't have to worry about special features. Everything is there on the stat block. So Shadow of the Demon Lords, guys, is a very dark and gritty game, a lot of gore. I love it, and it comes in at number 5 on my all-time top 5. Now, coming in at number 4 is Newman Era, and this is by Monte Cook Games. Now, Newman Era has been out for several years now, and it is a sci-fi game. And normally, I don't like sci-fi games, but there's enough fantasy that's splashed into Newman Era that really got my attention. And plus, I read several of the other short stories, and I just fell in love with the Ninth World. And the mechanics in this game are quite unique. They only use a 20-sided and a 6-sided and percentile in Newman Era. And the great thing is the game allows the game master to concentrate on game mastering, because all of the rolls are done by the players. So, taking a d20, the players will do all of their skill checks, the players will do all of the attack rolls versus the creatures that they're fighting, and they'll also take the d20 and do all of the defense checks for the monsters that are attacking them. So the DM doesn't have to do any rolls, except for if they want to roll a d100 on one of the many different tables for ciphers, which I'll get to in a second. Now, character customization. There are 5 core classes in the game. And now there's also a couple other player options books out now. And these 5 core classes, you get to choose other descriptors and foci that actually kind of combined everything. So at level 1 or tier 1, you're going to get to choose 3 things that mold your character. And then as you advance, using a very unique experience system, you can take and have choices on every tier. So if you're playing something that's going to have some magic, then you would actually get to choose between different magical spells. Or if you're a glaive and you're going mainly melee, then you would get to choose between a couple different types of attacks, or maybe some type of heal. You know, it's very nice to see a game that has a lot of choices, and Newman Era brings that to the table. I mean, there are tons and tons of ways to customize your character, so no 2 characters are going to be the same. Now, this XP system that I mentioned is also unique with the Newman Era that I like, and every time that there is a GM intrusion, that where the game master interjects some kind of drama into the game, then they get an experience card, and they get to give the experience card out. And then once you get 5 experience cards, then you get to take another tier level advancement. And then I also like how the game is supported with these cards. There's cards for monsters, there's cards for ciphers, there's cards for experience, GM Intrusion. I mean, there are so many decks of cards. It actually is a really nice tool for Newman Era, and you can use all this stuff on the fly. Now, I mentioned these ciphers. These ciphers are one-use items, and they're everywhere. And player characters can only have a certain amount of them. And I like that because if you find something and you know what it does, say if it's like something that's fists on your wrists and it does a sonic burst that knocks everything down on a cone in front of you, that's pretty cool. But maybe you'll find a one-use item like a small orb that will destroy an entire block of a town or a city. Maybe then you'll have to choose between which one you want. Or, maybe you'll find a healing injector. So the ciphers are really nice. They're everywhere, and they're one use. Artifacts are also really nice because these are the magic items in the game. And you'll have these until you roll a 1. Once you roll a 1, then that artifact disappears. So it's eventually going to happen, and it's inevitable that you're going to lose your artifact. I like that. And then it disappears and goes somewhere else in the ninth world. Then there's also oddities, which are little weird items, maybe from one of the previous worlds. So this world, the ninth world, is on its ninth reincarnation. Maybe you find a snow globe from our time, and you just shake it up in the snow, it just kind of rotates. But maybe it has a magical power. But the oddities don't affect the actual mechanics of the game. It just has like maybe a magical power. Maybe there's like little floating lights inside of it or something. So Newman Era, I really like. The mechanics are unique. Ciphers, I love magic items. So having all these magic items at your disposal to give to your players all the time without them always having them and then them having 20 and 30 magic items at the end, these little one-use ciphers are actually really nice. And it's a cool, nice little unique mechanic. So Newman Era comes in at number 4 on my top 5. So, coming in at number 3 is 13th Age by Pelgrane Press. And Rob Heinsu, the manager of 4th edition, I think, and Jonathan Tweet, the manager of 3rd edition. And these two chaps have come together and created this beautiful game set in the Dragon Empire. Now, 13th Age is a traditional fantasy game. It has orcs, wizards, fighters, dragons. But there are a few unique features of this game that I really like and what really actually turned me on to it. First, it has 13 icons. And these 13 icons are the living gods because there are no gods in this game. And these 13 living icons are actually living and they are around the Dragon Empire. And these icons really influence a lot of the game depending on what region you're in. It affects magic items that you're wearing. It affects the creatures that you are encountering. So the icons play a major role in this game. Now, there's also an escalation die, which this escalation die is another unique feature that is not in any other game, and I'm surprised that it hasn't been thought of earlier. And the escalation die is a 6-sided. And on the first round of combat, nothing's affected. But on the second round of combat, the escalation die goes to a 1. And the escalation die gives all of the player characters a +1 to hit. The next round, it goes to a 2. And then the next round, it goes to a 3, all the way up to a D6. So on the 7th round, everybody's getting a +6 to hit. Monsters are not affected by this. However, monsters are affected by what skills and features they can use sometimes, depending on what the escalation die is. So some monsters can actually reset the escalation die back to maybe a 3 or maybe even down to a 1. Maybe the escalation die will allow this creature, a dragon, to breathe again. So the escalation die actually plays a pretty big part of 13th Age. Now, the class system is also unique because there's only 10 levels in 13th Age. And if you are playing a fighter and you are using your handy dandy longsword, it's a 1d8, just like it is in pretty much any other game. Now, whenever you hit 2nd level, your 1d8 longsword now goes into a 2d8 longsword plus your modifier for your class. Then there are 3 tiers in the game. And these tiers affect your modifier multiplier. So when you hit tier 2 and level 5, your modifier is now times 2. And when you hit tier 3, your modifier is times 3. So whenever you hit max level at level 10, that little crappy rusty longsword that you've been using since level 1 will be 10d8 plus triple your modifier. Who doesn't want to attack and see huge numbers like that? You don't get that in Pathfinder, you don't get that in Dungeons and Dragons. Now, not only does weapon damage for melee skill, but if you're a caster and if you're using magic, then your spells will also scale to whatever level you are. So, you'll gain more damage as like you would using spells in D&D 5e. But you won't have to use spell slots, so automatically upgrade. Now, another thing that I like about 13th Age is how everything is presented, especially in the 2 core books, the 13th Age core book, and then there's a 13 True Ways, which is like a core book too, that even extends more classes, more races, more monsters, more lore of the Dragon Empire. So between these 2 books, you have everything you need to play. And then there's other supported, Bestiary 1, which they're working on a Bestiary 2 as we speak. There's all kinds of adventures, and the quality of these books is amazing. The art is amazing. So 13th Age, I really like it. I'll be playing this for a long time to come. And this actually was probably going to be number 2 on my list, except for one small little thing, and I'll talk about that with my number 2. So 13th Age comes in at number 3 on my all-time top 5. So coming in at number 2 is Savage Worlds by Pinnacle Entertainment and Shane Hensley. Now, Savage Worlds comes in at number 2 because it is a generic rule system, and I prefer that so I can play other games. Now that I'm getting older, I'm starting to branch out and play more games besides just fantasy. So with Savage Worlds, it's a generic rule set, and depending on whatever genre you play, the core mechanics, the core rules always stay the same. So you can play fantasy, you can play high fantasy, you can play a horror setting, you can play a pirate setting like we're doing now with 50 Fathoms, you can play London 1890s, Jack the Ripper with a Ripper setting, you can play a World War II called Weird Wars that has zombies and werewolves and Nazis and Russians and Americans and the French. So I like having Savage Worlds at number 2 because it gives me the opportunity to play different genres of games instead of just always playing fantasy. So one of the main gimmicks of this game is the acing die or exploding die. Now this is where if you roll, say, a d4 and you roll a 4, then you get to re-roll it and add that number. And as long as you keep rolling max, you can just continue to roll and then add it all up. So attacking and damage can get quite crazy because your damage also aces as well. And I'm not going to go into all the different toughnesses and parries, but one cool thing about the mechanics is all skills and all ranged attacks are based off of a DC 4. So the higher attributes you have, the better chance of you being successful on your attacks. If you do a melee attack, you only attack the target's parry. So there's not a whole lot of rules and mechanics involved with Savage Worlds. It's all generic, and it doesn't matter what game you play, what type of game you play, it's always the same. I love the Benny system. The Benny works like Inspiration in 5e, but Bennies, you can re-roll your attacks. You can soak your damage that you take to get rid of the wounds. You can get rid of your shaken status. And those are all things that you'd have to read on. So I love the Benny system. And then the core book has everything you need. It has all the player stuff, all of the massive amount of customization with its edges and hindrances. So if you take edges, you have to take some hindrances for your character as well. There's 25 levels, gone over 5 tiers in Savage Worlds, so there's a lot of customization involved. And plus, whatever setting you play, say if you play Deadlands, then there's a whole new player's book that you get to add in all those edges and hindrances. So not only do you have the edges and hindrances in the core book, but also in the setting book that you're playing. So there's massive amounts of character customization. I like it. There's even spells. They're called powers, but they're generic. So you get to reword them, you get to change what they look like, you get to change the elements. So there's a lot of freedom of the player to be able to customize their character on however they want to play. So, but I'm just warning you, things can get out of hand really quick, especially when you start acing a bunch of die. Oh, that's so fun, though. Seeing like 35 and 40 damage. It's crazy. Because there is no hiding behind 20 plus armor classes in this game. It's not like the other D20s out there. There's no hundreds and hundreds of hit points on a character. You take 4 wounds, you're toast, basically. You're going to have either, you're going to be bleeding out every round until you die, or you're going to have like some permanent major brain injury or a leg gone or an arm gone. And I love it because it covers everything. It covers chase rules, it covers space combat, it covers all the different weapons from modern day to muskets to space lasers to even guns on a tank like an M1 Abrams. It has stats for a Yugo. It has stats for a Dodge Ram pickup, stats for a Mustang airplane, stats for a galleon, a man of war. It has, the core book covers everything. You know, it is beautifully put together. So that's why I have Savage Worlds at number 2 on my top 5. So coming in at number 1, that's right, you guessed it, Dungeons and Dragons. I grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons. I started playing in 1984. I started playing Classic. I saw these kids messing around on a playground, fake sword fighting, jumping on these huge, dirty, water-infested, snake and spider-infested used tractor tires. And I loved it. I watched them. I was a new kid at the school. I went up to them and asked them if I could play. They thought I was going to make fun of them because I was like 2 foot taller than all of them. So this is how I got into D&D. They pulled out their character sheets. It had like a stick figure with, you know, a shield for armor class. It had all of their coins and gems, and I was like, you guys need to show me how to play this. And then it just evolved from there. I played classic D&D. I have a level 31, almost immortal, level 31 cleric. 6 pages worth of a character sheet. We also played First Edition Advanced. First Edition Advanced was awesome. It actually separated races and classes for the first time. You know, then Second Edition came out. Second Edition, we didn't play as much because we were young teenagers. We would take a trip over to Orlando to Enterprise 1701, which was our game store. We bought the core books. We put all our money together, bought the 3 core books. It had been out for a couple months by now. And then a couple months later, we saved up more money. We went back, and then there was a whole row of second edition stuff. All these player handbooks, all these racial books, all these equipment guides. So we said, wow, we can't do this. So we reverted back to First Edition Advanced. But we played a mixture of both classic, First Edition, and then we also had our second edition box sets like the Ravenloft and Undermountain and stuff. So we converted that because first edition and second edition were pretty much the same game, minus the classes and races and stuff. So that was fun. We played a lot of Greyhawk. We played a lot of Mystara. We played Hollow World. We did all the Gazetteer stuff. I mean, we played so much D&D when I was a kid. That's all we used to do. So that's why D&D is number 1 on my list. We used to drive our parents batshit crazy trying to get books out of them. We would all stay at one of my friends' house that had just got recently married, and she would stay on the weekends in another town with her husband because they were trying to sell the houses and stuff. So plus they worked at Kennedy Space Center together. So we had my friend's mother's house all to ourselves. So that's where we went every weekend. My parents wouldn't see me until Sunday night when my mom would come and get me. They'd send me to school with a $10 bill on Friday. That would be enough to buy like 3 big 60 cookies from Winn-Dixie, and it would be enough to buy like 10 2-liters at like 30 cents a 2-liter. Oh my gosh. Fuck, man, we ate so much shit back then. It was Big 60 cookies, what is Mountain Lightning or whatever it is at Winn-Dixie, Mountain Lightning. And then we'd had another fast food place that was actually called Hot and Now. And you could get 19-cent cheeseburgers here at Hot and Now. So we would take a trip over to the island and buy like 50 cheeseburgers for the weekend, and then we'd just microwave them a couple at a time. God, those were the days, man. We had no care, no worries, and then you'd see your mom or your dad, they'd come and pick you up like 2.5 days later. It was awesome. God, those were the days. So guys, D&D has a special place in my heart. So there you go, everybody. That is my top 5 that you guys out in the community have been bugging the shit out of me for years to do. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. And I want to know what your top 5 is. So leave it in the comments section down below, please. If you liked the video, please thumbs it up. If you haven't subscribed yet to the YouTube channel, what are you waiting for? If you already are subscribed, stay subscribed. That's a no-brainer. And until next time, happy gaming, and keep rolling those 20s.